True Gay Crime contains coarse language, adult themes, and content that is violent and disturbing. If at any time you feel you need help, please refer to the toll-free crisis lines in the show notes. And welcome to another episode of True Gay Crime. I'm your host, Patrick Marano. And on today's episode, we cover the Grindr killer, Stephen Port, a man with a proclivity for drugging and raping twinks using G, T, and poppers. If you don't know what those are, you will find out in this story. They're drugs. But first, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, just a quick reminder that you can rate and review True Gay Crime. It really helps me out content-wise, and it tells Apple to spread True Gay Crime love in the podcast universe. So, my sources for this are, I got lots from Murderpedia. Thanks, Murderpedia. Also, independent.co.uk and the telegraph.co.uk. Obviously, this is a British story. All right. I'm not going to do an accent. Don't ask me to do accents. Not good at them. Ain't gonna happen. Actually, do you know that impression? Ain't gonna happen. Oh, God, that's a bad impression. Oh, God, I'm so bad at impressions. I wish I was good. People, it's whenever somebody does impressions, I'm just so in awe of that talent. Anyway, ain't gonna happen. You know, that's Victor Newman from The Young and the Restless. I don't sound like him, but that's what he says all the time. Okay, so let's talk about GHB for a second because it is integral to this story. So GHB, so Stephen Port was using GHB to get his victims immobilized and unconscious, basically. So the drug, just a little background, if you're not familiar with GHB as I am intimately familiar with. Okay, so the drug was originally manufactured as a medical anesthetic. Now it's often simply known as G, and it's abused in low dosages to produce short-lived euphoria. Now, it can cause dizziness, nausea, and then drowsiness. This is depending on how much you take, of course. Drowsiness, unconsciousness, and eventually coma, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, and death. So, one of the particular dangers presented by the drug is that whether it's presented as a powder or as a liquid, it's colorless, and so it can be readily used to spike a drink. So, you might know it as the date rape drug. And it just renders, you can just dump it in somebody's drink. It's colorless. They won't know. Especially if it's an alcohol or a strong tasting drink, they're certainly not going to be able to taste it. And then the person, what happens, it's extremely dangerous to mix with alcohol. P.S. Don't do it. And what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So the effect basically is if you dump that in somebody's drink, they're going to just seem drunk. They're not going to be acting more oddly. If you do it in the right dose of that you're supposed to do for a date rape, cocktail, they're going to feel woozy, dizzy, and they're outwardly to everyone else, they're just going to seem like they've had too much to drink. Right? So it's nothing's going to seem out of the ordinary. You're in a bar, so, they just had one too many. So it's really easy to get the measurements wrong. It's really easy to do too much. It's really dangerous for that. Okay, so let's start with the story of the Grindr killer, Stephen Port. In 2012, Stephen Port's first victim had just turned 19 when Port reached out to him on Grindr. They decided to meet at Port's flat, where there was a bit of small talk, and the overall feeling was very friendly. It was relaxed. He was being very polite. Port disappears into the kitchen. He returns with 2 glasses of red wine. The 2 men are chatting. They're drinking. Suddenly, the 19-year-old reaches the bottom of his glass. He's done his drink. He tilts the glass to get the last bit of wine, and he notices something at the bottom of the glass, some kind of congealed substance. Was it a powder? He didn't know. Putting the glass down on the table, he immediately started to feel dizzy, and it was difficult for him to concentrate or form sentences. He wanted to confront Port, ask him what he had done, and then storm out of the flat, but he was too paralyzed by the drug to even move. Port heaves the boy over his shoulder, takes him into the bedroom, where he proceeded in undressing him. In and out of consciousness, the boy remembers being raped by Port until finally he passes out completely. When the boy goes back to school in the following days, he tells his friend about the experience, who goes with him to get checked out by the doctor due to the rape and to the drugs. Obviously, make sure that he's okay. And the 19-year-old was maybe the first victim, but he certainly was not the last. And all things considered, he's lucky to have survived the encounter, as we're about to find out. Okay. Stephen Port is born in Southend-on-Sea. At 1 year old, the family moved to East London. No surprise, he's described as a loner and he's bullied at school, which seems par for the course for these people. His teachers say he's a quiet child. Always look out for the quiet ones, right? And after high school, he goes to art college, but he drops out. But I was like, you know how many courses I started and dropped out? So I hope that's not what makes a serial killer, because then I'm a ticking time bomb. Neighbors say the grown-up Stephen Port did weird things like play with children's toys. And one of his former partners even breaks up with him due to his childish attitudes, which I find very interesting. Port comes out of the closet in his mid-20s, which I find is kind of late in these days, which sort of tells me that he's struggled a bit with himself and accepting himself as well. He then moves into a flat in Barking, London, and works as a chef at a bus depot in West Ham, which is also in East London. Imagine, like, a chef at a bus depot? I wonder what kind of qualifications you need to be a chef. I feel like using the term chef is probably being a little generous. Chef, really? How about cook? Or how about prep cook? I mean, it's a bus depot, for Christ's sake. But he does go on TV. This is crazy. He goes on TV in an episode of Master Chef. He's, well, like, in the background, he's one of the helper chefs. So Master Chef has celebrities and they're cooking, and he was one of the helper guys in the back in the kitchen. But he's there. He's on TV. So I don't know how he went from a bus depot to TV, but that's show business, kid. And he's super fit. He goes to the gym. He's really concerned about his appearance. He wants to look good. And he's actually going bald, and he wears a blonde wig because, well, he didn't want to be bald. So, you can see all of the pictures on my Instagram or on Facebook. So it's around this time that Port creates his profile on Grindr and other gay and bi social networks for sex and dating. His bio changes from site to site. On one of them, he's pretending to be a graduate of Oxford University. In another one, he's a member of the Royal Navy. And in another one, he's a special needs teacher. So I wonder why he chose those. So the Royal Navy, okay, that sounds hot. Like, who doesn't want to hook up with like a Navy guy? I get that one. Oxford University, okay, so you're trying to impress people with your intelligence or your accomplishments. A special needs teacher, that's very specific. I wonder why he chose that as part of his bio. I mean, was it so people thought he was nice? Maybe so people would think he was a nice and caring person? Who can say? We'll never know. Okay. Port likes them young. As we saw with his first victim of 19 years old, his second victim is only 20 when they meet in June 2014 on a gay website. The boy feels comfortable with Port, saying that he felt safe and he's a very nice guy. So obviously Port had a whole shtick down where he just came across as a really trustworthy, nice person. And that is so dangerous. So unfortunately for the boy, Port is anything but nice and trustworthy. And after drinking a non-alcoholic drink, the boy feels dizzy and he passes out. When he comes to, he can't control his body. He can't move his limbs. He wants to shout. He wants to scream for help, but he just can't make a sound. We'll never know what really happened while the boy is passed out, but once he's conscious, Port picks him up, puts him in the car, drives him to the train station at Barking, and leaves him there. Barely able to move or talk, the boy is huddled in a corner when the transport police find him. So, I mean, he got out alive. Again, that's a plus in this story. He's incoherent, he's in distress, and he's unsteady on his feet. He starts vomiting green stuff, which they find out later is an overdose of GHB. So, victim number 2 survives with his life, but Port is getting more and more confident with each victim, and the next one to cross his path doesn't fare as well. All right, enter Anthony Walgate. He's 23 years old. He's a fashion student. He's clever. He's funny. He's talented. and he has dreams of being a famous fashion designer. He works part-time as an escort to pay his bills for school. Anthony's very careful when he comes to his clients. I mean, God. And he was being careful. So, I mean, it's a dangerous, let's just say it's a dangerous profession, even when you're being careful. Because look what happens. So anyway, he's being careful. He always gets an address in advance of going to wherever he is, and he always has a photograph, and he gives that information to others so they know where he is and who he's with, which is smart, right? At least people know where you were going, who you were with when you were last seen. So on June 15th, 2014, Port reaches out to Anthony through an escort site called Sleepy Boys, and he offers him £800 for an overnight stay on June 17th. Of course, Port has no savings at all, and he certainly would never pay that kind of money. Like, he just doesn't have that, so he was never going to pay that. But Port arranges to meet Anthony at Barking Station. He arrives at 10:15. Anthony is never seen alive again. Inside Port's flat, he offers Anthony a drink, which he accepts. He drinks, he feels dizzy, and he passes out. Port takes him to the bedroom, rapes him, and then realizes that he's killed him. Not knowing what to do, Port leaves the body of his victim at home, dead in the flat. He gets dressed, and he leaves to work the night shift. Yeah, he doesn't call in sick. He doesn't skip work. He goes to work. I guess in his mind, he must have been like, okay, I got to act like everything's normal. I got to think about this. I'm just going to leave this here for now and reassess. Anyway, he gets home around 4 a.m. He dresses the dead body of Anthony, and he plants an empty vial of G in the pocket to make it look like he overdosed himself. And then he disposes of his phone because obviously he fears the police are going to see the communications between him and Port. And then he drags the young man out to the front of his building, and he props him up against the wall, making it look like he had just passed out there. Then he takes his own phone, he dials 999, and he tells the operator that he just happened to cross a young man slouched over on the ground outside of his building. He tells the operator he thinks he might be drunk or suffering a seizure. I mean, wow. You know, most people put a body in a trunk, they drive out to the middle of the woods, they bury it, they dump it in. This guy is so lazy that he just drags the body to the front of his building and pretends that he came across it there. I mean, that's risky. I mean, and then he calls 999. So emergency services arrive. Anthony is pronounced dead, of course, around 8 a.m. So at first, the authorities actually buy Port's version of things. That is, until they find out that he had hired Anthony as an escort for the night. So it didn't take the police long for them to figure out that he was lying. Port tries to deny it's true, but the police know otherwise. A pathology report shows that Anthony died of a drug overdose of G. So Port changes his story, and he admits that Anthony had come to visit him in his flat, but that the G was his and he overdosed himself. Then he tells the police that he moved the body outside because he panicked, and he didn't want the police to think he had anything to do with the death or think that it was murder. See, the thing with me, here's the thing. If you tell the police one story and then they find out dirt on you and they realize that you had lied, and then you're like, oh, okay, no, this is what really happened. You have zero credibility at this point. Like, you've already lied. Why would we think that now you're telling the truth? Clearly, everything out of your mouth is going to be a lie and a cover-up, right? So he's actually convicted of perverting the course of justice by making a false police statement. So they can't pin the murder on him, but he did lie to the police. So, like I said, he's convicted of perverting the course of justice by making a false police statement. And in March 2015, he goes to jail for like 2 seconds, and then he's released a couple months later, and he's electronically tagged. This is a situation, again, where the police had the right person in custody, but they couldn't hold them because there wasn't enough. This happens so often, where the police bring somebody into custody, they don't have enough, they have to let them go. And then the person goes out and does more things and more horrendous things. So basically, he gets away with murder, but the police have their eye on him for all the good that it does the next slew of victims. The police are completely useless in this story. We're going to cover that in a little bit. So now we have Gabriel Cavari. He's a 22-year-old Slovakian who needed a place to stay. Port reaches out to him and he offers him a place at his. He's basically like, dude, I have a room. Come stay with me. So on August 23rd, 2014, Cavari moves in with Port. Poor guy. Gabriel Cavari was just Port's type. He's young, he's slender, he's a twink. In fact, in a correspondence with Port's friends, he tells them that they should come meet his new Slovakian twink flatmate. Gabriel does not feel the same way about Port at all. He just wanted a place to live. He didn't want to be hooking up with Port at all. So he messages his friends saying that he had to sleep on the sofa because he didn't want to sleep in the bed with Port. His friends warned him that Port would make moves on him if he slept in the same bed. Obviously. I mean, duh. At 5 a.m. on the 25th of August, Gabriel sends his last text. In the wee hours of the morning, Port gives Gabriel a drink laced with G with the intention to rape him, but again, it kills him. So something's going on with the dosages. I don't know if Port is doing it on purpose. He's trying to kill these people, or you know what I mean? Or if he's just really sucks at measuring. Like, use a dropper and measure your shit. People are dying, which I guess he didn't care. I don't know. Or he was pushing the limits. And I guess everybody reacts differently to drugs. So maybe he's giving the same amount and it's just hitting people differently. That afternoon, Port changes his phone number and he tells a friend that Gabriel had left without saying much. So he starts covering his tracks, right? He's saying that Gabriel just upped and left without saying anything and that he probably moved back to Spain to live with his ex-partner there. Now, Port waits a few days with Gabriel's dead body lying in his flat. Now, what do you think he's been doing with the dead body in his... Hello, Dennis Nilsson. If you remember the podcast with Dennis Nilsson, this guy loved young, slender, twinky guys. He loved raping them when they were unconscious and or sleeping with their dead bodies. So here we are again. Finally, he needed to dispose of the body, of course. So Port drags Gabriel to the nearby churchyard of Barking Abbey, which is 500 meters from his flat, and props him up in a sitting position against the graveyard wall to be found by a passerby. He plants an empty vial of G in his pocket, again, to make it look like an accidental overdose. Pathology reports confirm it was a drug overdose with very high and fatal levels of GHB. Okay, so instead of just dumping the body in front of his building, which that would look pretty suspicious to police, although the police in 2014 in Barking were the worst. Port could have probably dumped every one of his victims just outside of his doorstep with an empty vial of G, and the police would not have put it together. That's how stupid this police is at this time. So there's a dead body in front of his building, empty vial of G. Okay, dead. Then 500 meters away in the churchyard, there's a dead body, an empty vial of G. It's the same. They're both gay. They're both young. They're both planted the same way in a sitting up position. Like, the police, at this point, it's obvious. And it's not just because I know the story. Sorry. It's obvious. But the police do not put two and two together in this case. So, meanwhile, the police are doing nothing. Basically, Port has an ongoing semi-consensual relationship with another victim. Although there is consensual sex, it later comes out in the court that there are doubts of being drugged and raped with him too. So the victims just continue. They don't all die, but he continues drugging and raping people. On September 18th, 2014, Port arranges to meet Daniel Witworth. He's a 21-year-old ambitious chef from Gravesend in Kent. The two meet on a gay dating website called Fit Lads. And on his way to meet Port, Daniel texts his partner saying that he'll be home late. Once he gets to Port's, he goes in, feels comfortable. Obviously, Port is, turning on the charm. Port offers him a drink. He gets dizzy. He passes out. He rapes the 21-year-old, who then dies of the drug overdose. Port, realizing Daniel is dead, begins to cover his tracks, as is his MO. So Port deletes his Fit Lads account, and under the cover of darkness, he carries Daniel's body to Barking Abbey and basically places him exactly where he left the last body. He sits him up against the wall. He puts an empty vial of G in his pocket. He takes his cell phone, so there's no evidence about communication between the two of them. But this time, he includes a fake suicide note in the left hand explaining that, saying that he had taken his own life because he couldn't handle the guilt of having overdosed Gabriel. What? Yes, you heard me right. So what Port does is he's trying to pin the previous death of the guy from before, Gabriel, that he put in the churchyard. He's trying to blame that murder on this guy, saying in Daniel's suicide note that he felt so guilty for murdering, whether accidentally or not, doesn't matter, it's not true, Gabriel, that he takes his own life. So the pathology report obviously confirms the cause of death was GHB toxicity. So Port, at this time, he's really trying to cover his tracks. So he starts drip feeding this new, elaborate story to Gabriel's ex in Spain so that there's kind of a trail, right? So the story goes something like this. Port says that Daniel and Gabriel actually, this is all constructed to cover the murders. So he says that Daniel and Gabriel actually met at a party that he was at as well, and that the two of them left the party with Port's consent to go have sex at Port's flat. Then the boys headed out to Barking Abbey to have sex outdoors, which doesn't make any sense. If Port is saying in the story that he let those two boys go to his flat to have sex, then why would they go in a graveyard to do it? You would only have sex in a graveyard, well, I guess if it was a fetish of yours, or if you didn't have another place to go. But according to his story, they did, so I don't get that part. And that's where Daniel gave Gabriel a lethal dose of G, whether it was accidental or not, doesn't matter. Then, of course, he's racked with guilt. Daniel returns to the scene of the crime, and he kills himself the same way in the same spot. So that's the fake story. That's fake news. Fake story. Anyway. It might have been a good story, but later a handwriting expert demonstrates that without a doubt, the suicide note was written by Port. Oh my God. Well, no, but it gets worse. Wait, he denies that this is true. They have a handwriting expert that's dude, you wrote this letter. This is later in the courts. Yeah, there's 100% accuracy that you wrote this letter. And he's like, no, I didn't. But already, sorry, your credibility gone. You've already lied to us once. I mean, the shit people get away with, or have the gall to say and think that they're going to get away with. Ugh. Meanwhile, if somebody gives me the wrong change at the convenience store, I'm like, ooh, no, you gave me a nickel too much. Here, take that back. What's wrong with me? He denies it's true. Of course, this only comes out later, so Port is still a free man. So, enter Port's last victim, Jack Taylor. He's a 25-year-old forklift driver living with his parents, and he's not out of the closet. So his only connection to gay life is the dating websites. He goes out one night, he has some drinks, then he gets on Grindr. He sees Port online, and they arrange to meet at Barking Station at 3:15 in the morning on September 13th, and they go back to Port's flat. As with the other men, Port pours Jack a tainted glass of something, which Jack drinks, then he passes out, and just before 7:30 a.m. that morning, Port blocks Jack on Grindr, which basically is telling us, that Jack is already dead, because he's covering his tracks already. We know his MO, so he deletes his messages on Grindr, it deletes everything. Then later, Port deletes his Grindr account completely, and then he texts his flatmate not to return home for a while, which of course we can only assume Jack is dead. He's dead in the flat, so Port doesn't want his flatmate to come back and find the dead body. First of all, I have a question also. You have a flatmate? What? Somebody lives with you? Why are you bringing people home and murdering them when your flatmate could come home at any second? Right? Unless, I don't know, I'm trying to think, maybe they are away on business a lot. But in this case, he actually had to text his flatmate and, yeah, don't come home. And I wonder what excuse he used, honestly. No, I have to come home. I'm tired. What do you mean, don't come home? This is not a very good flatmate situation. And also, if you're a murderer, you should probably live alone. wouldn't that be easier? I guess he couldn't afford it. Well, then downsize. Oh my God, I'm having a whole conversation with myself in my mind. Okay. Then Port waits for the cover of darkness, as is his MO again, and then he goes about his usual routine of dragging the body to the churchyard. He sits it up against a wall with an empty vial of G in the pocket, but this time he adds a tourniquet, some medical wipes, and some stab marks, some like needle marks in the arm. So he's really going all out now to make it look like a drug overdose. And then, of course, he tosses the guy's cell phone, Jack's cell phone. And then toxicology later confirms that Jack died from drug and alcohol overdose, which, you know what, I said before. So do not, if you're out there and you're experimenting with GHB, do not have it with alcohol. Not good. No, bad. I'm not condoning drugs. This is just a public service announcement to say, if it ever crosses your path and you do it, don't do it with alcohol. What am I saying? Oh, yeah. This is like, so classic. He's doing it again. Like, it's the same MO. He drags him to the churchyard. There's an empty vial of G. He props them up against the wall. I mean, it's astonishing. The police have not put it together. I mean, what? This is the fourth dead, young, gay, dead person. GHB toxicology, pathology comes back. They all know how they died. They're all propped up in the same position, in the same place. I mean, one has a fake suicide note. That a little differences. It's so obviously connected. But it gets worse, wait. So we've got 4 dead guys. We've got 4 dead men, all drug overdoses, all G, all within 500 meters of each other, 3 in the exact same spot, and the police don't make the connection. And the same woman walking her dog finds 2 of them. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You're walking your dog. Finding 1 dead body would be extremely traumatizing. Well, I guess first you see it and you think it's somebody just passed out. Well, maybe you can tell. I think you can tell sometimes, right? But then she finds this body. I guess she calls 999. The police come, etc. Then she goes home. She's kind of telling. I'm sure she told people like, "Oh my God, guess what happened today?" Blah blah blah. I was out for a walk with Spot, and we found a dead body. And then she's probably calling her mother and telling everybody. And then not long after, she's out walking her dog again, doing the same route with Spot. And then she sees another dead body. I mean, that's like, I was going to say that's like winning the lottery twice, but no, these aren't good things. But you know what I mean? This is like, first of all, what are the chances? And you know what the chances are? Really good if you're dealing with an asshole like Stephen Port, who has no imagination. How dense is this murderer that he's killing them the same way and putting them in the same spot? Not only that, I mean, and it's not like on the other side of town or something. It's like in his backyard. And he already has a file with the police. So I don't know why people are so stupid. But, well, you know who's more stupid though? The police. They haven't even put it together yet. Okay, so now there's a whole slew of victims who, all of these ones survived, and they appeared in court, and they testified against Stephen Port. So, like I said, the police are still not putting 2 and 2 together. Not 2 and 2, more than 2 and 2, for God's sake. They can't put it together, so Port is obviously free, and he keeps doing his thing. I don't know why these next ones didn't die. That's why I'm assuming, G is going to hit different people different ways. I don't know if he lowered the dosage. Maybe he was like, okay, I shouldn't be killing people. This is too much hassle. Maybe I'll just drug them and rape them, which is what happened with a whole bunch of them, including his next victim, who's 22, but looks much younger and had been going through gender reassignment surgery. Of course, it never said if they were going male to female or female to male. They didn't say that. But anyway, he goes to Port's flat. He's offered a drink, and he was raped while unconscious. Port films the rape and shows it to the 22-year-old the next day. Like, this is how confident that this guy is getting, that he's not going to get caught. He does all that, films it, and then shows the victim the next day. Obviously, the guy gets super pissed off. They fight, and he ends up being a witness at the trial. Good. Well, okay. Port's next victim is 35 years old, which is a bit older than the others. They meet on Grindr in July 2015. The man flat out says, hey, I do not want to do drugs. I don't do drugs. Yes, let's fuck. But this time, Port has developed a new system for getting the drugs into the victim. So I guess he thought that this was more clever. So what he would tell them is that he likes to use a little plastic syringe to administer lubricant into the anus for intercourse. But of course, what do you think was in the syringe? Do you think it was lube? No, it's full of G. It's full of GHB. So GHB shot directly into the butt is going to be absorbed much more quickly, and it's going to be hit the victim a lot more strongly than if they took it orally, right? So when the syringe of G is shot up this man's butt, the 35-year-old victim, immediately he feels a burning and a tingling and a numbing. Luckily for him, he was able to dress and leave before falling unconscious, because we know what happens when you're unconscious around Stephen Port. So this happened again soon after for his next victim, because in August 2015, Port meets a man on Grindr. The man makes it clear he's not into drugs. He doesn't want to do any drugs. At the flat, Port administers the syringe of G into his butt, pretending that it's lubricant. The man feels a pain. He gets dizzy, and he's incapacitated. And in that state, Port rapes him while he's falling unconscious. He testifies at the trial. The next victim knew Port from an earlier encounter. This victim made it clear in their Grindr exchanges in September 2015 that he was not doing drugs at all. But again, at Port's flat, with the syringe, the man feels a sharp pain, a burning, gets dizzy, but he also manages to leave before falling unconscious, and testifies at the trial. The next victim of Port to take the stand was a 24-year-old who had a sexual relationship with Port for some time before, but had since been with a partner, but now him and his partner had broken up, and he was basically homeless. So he reaches out to Port just as a place to stay. You know, he's couch surfing, basically. And what do you think? Port takes him in. Of course, he's like, great, a young, vulnerable victim. Perfect, come on. The young man, of course, is desperate to feel better. He turns to alcohol and drugs. So Port, of course, takes advantage of this. And one weekend, he gives him a line of drugs, and they have consensual sex. But obviously that wasn't enough or exciting enough for Port, because the next weekend, he pulls the whole syringe thing, and he shoots G up the guy's ass. The guy gets palpitations, and he raped him while he was unconscious. So the police investigation leads to CCTV camera footage of Port walking with Jack Taylor, which you'll remember is his last victim who died, at Barking Station, which is where he meets everybody. And by the way, is that a good place to be meeting your victims? At a train station? Okay, yes, it's busy, so maybe you can get lost in the crowds and stuff, but for sure, 100%, there's CCTV all over the place. So when the police are going to be investigating, it's going to be easy to catch you on camera. So maybe you should meet them in a deserted park or something. This guy's not the brightest bulb. But then neither are the police. So I guess they were evenly matched. So basically, yeah, the police have this CCTV of Stephen Port with Jack Taylor at the train station. So during the trial, Port, first he denies that he ever knew Jack, and he pretended not to recognize him when they showed him the photos of Jack, and he denies having him over to his flat to have sex with him. But eventually the evidence proves otherwise, obviously. They're like, you sure you don't know Jack at all? And then he's like, no. And then they pull up the footage, the CCTV. Is this not you, sir? Yes. Is that Jack? I guess. Okay, so you do know him. Yes, I do. I mean, what an asshole. Okay, so he changes his story. He's like, oh yeah, I remember him. We went to the graveyard. So this is his story. He said, we went to the graveyard to have sex. Then he took drugs and I left. I guess he died after I left. Mm-hmm. Of course, no one in the court believes him. This guy's credibility totally out the window. So conviction and life sentence for this asshole. On November 23rd, 2016, Port is convicted of the assaults of penetration, rapes, and murders of Anthony Walgate, 23, Gabriel Cavari, 22, Daniel Witworth, 21, and Jack Taylor, 25, as well as they're in their 20s. They're just babies. As well as the rapes of 3 other men he drugged and 10 counts of administering a substance with intent and 4 sexual assaults. He's found guilty on all counts. In total, 11 men were known victims of Port's crimes. Commenting on the case, Malcolm McHaffey is the Deputy Chief Crown Prosecutor for CPS London, says, I quote, over a period of 3 years, the defendant committed a series of murders and serious sexual offenses against young men. Port manipulated and controlled these men through the chilling and calculated use of the drug GHB, which he administered without their permission. This was a technically challenging case, complicated by a significant amount of evidence taken from the numerous social media sites Port used. So the trial happens at the Old Bailey. The Old Bailey! I feel like the Old Bailey is like an old friend of ours. If you're a friend of the podcast and you've been listening, you remember the Old Bailey. We covered that with Jeremy Thorpe, went to the Old Bailey. And also Dennis Nilsson was at the Old Bailey. And now we have Stephen Port at the Old Bailey on November 25th, 2016. So Mr. Justice Openshaw sentenced Port to life imprisonment with a whole life order. So that bitch ain't going anywhere. Okay, so we can't talk about the story without talking about the obvious elephant in the room. I guess it's not really an elephant because I've been talking about it throughout the whole podcast. But the police investigation, the fucked up police investigation, we need to talk about this. So the bodies of the 4 men were found in the vicinity of Port's flat in just over a year from late September 2014. Walgate, which is the first, was outside the front door, and the other 3 were in the nearby graveyard, right? The Metropolitan Police neglected to link the deaths, as we know, even though the Pink News website and the Force's LGBT Independent Advisory Group were warning of a serial murderer on the loose, but still the police had told them the crimes were not linked. This sounds super familiar. Again, if you're a friend of the podcast and you've been listening, you may remember that Bruce MacArthur, remember that? The police were not linking the murders or the disappearances of the men that were going missing in Toronto. They were about the same age. There was a lot from the same ethnic group, and they weren't putting it together. And also, Bruce had a brush with the law, so they had him in custody at one point, and then he got out just like Stephen Port, and then he went on to do all this murdering, and the police never put 2 and 2 together. So that's what they're doing here as well. So there's a BBC One documentary broadcast which happened in March of 2017, which pointed out, quote, a catalog of police failings. So let's go through the failings of the police, because that's fun to do. I mean, not for the victims or their families, but let's go through the failings of the police. Crucial witnesses were not questioned. Okay, so for example, Port's neighbor had witnessed Stephen Port in a dazed, bizarre state, holding a large container full of white powder with bottles of clear liquid. And the neighbor also reported receiving suspicious text messages from Port regarding Gabriel Cavari. So they never spoke to the neighbors about everything they had seen. So now even Gabriel Cavari's former roommate gets involved. John Pape, he does a simple internet research for other unexplained deaths in the Barking area, and he obviously is surprised to find huge, glaring similarities in the case between Anthony Walgate and Gabriel Cavari, especially, of course, the locations in which the bodies are found. However, the police didn't link the 2 cases. John Pape, again, the former roommate of Gabriel Cavari, after learning about Daniel Witworth's death, which he was the 3rd one, and its similarity to the other deaths, he calls the detectives and the police afraid for his own safety, and they assure him that they're like, hey, John, don't worry about it. These murders are not linked. These deaths are not murders, and these deaths are not linked, and you have nothing to be afraid of. John offers himself to be interviewed by the police since he feels like he could have really relevant information about the death of his former roommate, Daniel Cavari, right? The police never get back to him. Fail. Also, the woman, remember the woman who was walking her dog Spot? I don't know if her dog's name is Spot. I just pretended that. The woman who found Gabriel Cavari and Daniel Witworth's bodies in the same location and almost exactly the same position is reported as saying that the police, quote, had no idea what they were doing, end quote. Again, fail. Then Daniel Witworth's stepmother says that when the police told her about her son's death, they made it sound like it was definitely an overdose from drugs before the investigation was even completed. And they were ignoring the obvious bruising under his arms, which would have meant that there was a third party involved. There were bruises there that he wouldn't necessarily would have been able to make by himself. It would have been somebody carrying him somewhere. They ignored that. Fail. Police took the suicide note that was found in Daniel's hand for face value. They sent a sample to the family for confirmation of the handwriting, which, P.S., can I just say something? Everything is electronic these days. I mean, I don't even know my own handwriting. It changes with my mood. You know what I mean? I don't think I could, if you showed me my brother's handwriting, I don't know if I could identify that and be like, yep, that's his. I don't know. I feel like everything is texting, emailing, electronic. So that's not a good way of confirming or not confirming something. The parents, of course, they're unsure. Well, duh, right? But the police record that the parents are unsure, but they record it as a confirmation that it was Daniel's handwriting, and they never submit it for forensic analysis. Fail. So the parents of Daniel Witworth also asked whether the police had investigated who was meant by, because in the note it said, the guy I was with last night. So the parents are like, well, what does that mean? What guy was he with last night? Stephen Port was trying to pretend like it was Gabriel Cavari who was with Daniel. But he doesn't say that in the note, so it just says the guy I was with last night, which means there was somebody else, which means the investigation is open. But the response that the police say is that it would never be possible to find out all of the answers in a case. So they just wash their hands. They don't even want to try with this. Daniel's stepmom is also basically told by police, quote, it is what it is, deal with it, end quote. Fail. Okay, so now Jack Taylor's sister, Jack Taylor being the fourth and final victim of Stephen Port's, she reports that the police just called them and were basically like, Jack's dead. And that they had just accepted the theory that, there was a syringe in the pocket, there was white powder in his wallet, needle marks on his arms. So obviously he had overdosed on drugs. Although she told them that her brother was very, very anti-drugs. So she knew that that was a total fraud. She and another sister contacted the police 11 days after his death for an update on the investigation, and they were told there is none. They also did some research for themselves, and they come across 3 previous cases, but the police responded by denying that there was any connection. So much like John Pape, who did his own internet research, the sisters of Jack were doing their research. They find the other cases that were extremely similar, and they're like, hello? And the cops are like, no, there's no connection there. No, you guys are wrong. 2 weeks after Jack's death, the police agreed to take the sisters to where Jack's body had been found in the cemetery and to Barking Station, and told them that CCTV footage of Jack and another man had been found. So they're like, okay, so there was somebody. Who is this other person in the video? They're totally surprised by the fact that they had not been notified at all of this new evidence. And they're even more surprised to be told that the police were not even attempting to identify the other man. You have somebody who is dead. You have CCTV from the night. The person is with someone else in the video, and you do not even attempt to identify who they're with. I'm tired of saying fail. Like, that's not even... This is beyond a failure at this point. So, next, the sisters requested that images of the other man in the video be made public in order to identify him. Yeah, of course they need to be made public. The police are reluctant, saying that they do not normally release CCTV images, but eventually they give in, and guess what? 2 days later, Port is identified from the images and arrested. So basically, the families of the victims are the ones that solved the crime, not the police. Following Port's conviction, the Independent Police Complaints Commission opened an investigation into whether 17 police officers should face disciplinary action. Fuck yeah. The families have also opened a civil claim against the Metropolitan Police. Fuck yeah. The Metropolitan Police also reported in 2016 they were re-examining 58 unexplained deaths involving date rape drugs, although a spokeswoman said that they have nothing to suggest that Port is linked to any of them. So Stephen Port's GHB dealer also got in trouble. His name is Gerald Matovu, and he was known to have supplied Port with the GHB that was used in the killings. So he's arrested in 2019, and he's sentenced to 31 years in prison for the murder of actor and businessman Eric Michaels. Using similar methods to Port, Matovu had targeted Michaels on Grindr and given him a fatal dose of GHB. Wow. I wonder if Matovu taught Stephen Port how to do the whole GHB thing, or if it was vice versa. I wonder who taught who. That's interesting. Anyway, the asshole's in jail. Sentenced to 31 years for murder. Shouldn't you get life? I mean, you murdered somebody. 31 years. I saw a picture of him. He doesn't seem that old. He could get out. I mean, let's say he's 30, 40, 50, 60. Okay, so you're still young. Then he gets out. So you murder somebody and you're out in your 60s? That doesn't seem long enough to me. And so ends the GHB-riddled, murderous story of the Grindr killer, Stephen Port. In popular culture, of course, whenever a story is like this, with Grindr, which is such a widely used app in the gay community, there's going to be things that happen in popular culture, like documentaries and movies. So in 2017, the BBC aired a documentary called How Police Missed the Grindr Killer, which examines the botched investigation into Port's murders, which I think I would just get so frustrated if I watched. I can't even... I would just throw things at the TV. And then in 2019, it was announced that the BBC would produce a drama thriller called The Barking Murders, which is going to be based on the investigation led by the families of Port's victims. See, that one I would watch because this is like the families taking control. Stephen Merchant's going to be in it, Sheridan Smith, Jamie Winstone. And then in January 2021, of course, it was announced that the broadcast of the program, which is already filmed, and now they changed it to, and it's called 4 Lives, which I like because it's kind of it's an homage to the 4 victims, instead of the murderer. Anyway, it's going to be delayed because of Corona. So, but keep your eyes open for that. Okay, so what really stands out for me in this story is the police fuck-up investigation. I mean, it is beyond ridiculous how inept that this investigation was. And I have a theory as to why. Can you guess what it is? If you've been listening to my podcast, we've talked about this before. Whoever guesses it gets a cookie. I believe that the ineptitude of the police force in Barking was due to a homophobic and institutionalized homophobic, an overall sort of homophobic attitude within the police force. There is no other possible reason I can think of for them to be so blatantly disregarding of obvious connections in the different deaths of these young gay men. So they knew they were gay, and it was drugs, and they didn't care. They didn't care. If these were young white girls being found in graveyards, what do you think would have happened? Exactly. Let's flip it. If these were young black men found in graveyards, what do you think would happen? Something very similar as to what happened in this case. These were young gay men. They knew they were on Grindr. They knew they were doing hooking up, doing sex, doing gay sex. Shame on them. And then doing the drugs. So obviously they're low lives. They're low lifes. I mean, this is just complete homophobic police work at its best. There is absolutely zero other possible reason why they would be so inept. If you can do a simple, as a former flatmate of one of the victims, you can do a simple internet search and find out more connective, reasons and find more connections between the deaths and put it together more than the police have. If it's not a culture of homophobia at the police station, then please tell me what it is. Because at least if it's a culture of homophobia, then we know that they blatantly disregarded the evidence. And then you're like, okay, at least that's what's happened. But if that's not the case, and they really are that inept, that is even worse. How can you be so bad at your job? Can you imagine? My God. I mean, I get nervous if I miss an email. And meanwhile, they're not connecting. God, I hope heads rolled for this. I mean, I really hope somebody got the boot. Got 2 boots. And some mittens. And maybe some earmuffs. And very similar, obviously, it's not just in Barking, but it was also in Toronto with the Toronto police when they were fucking up the investigation here when men of color were going missing. And, well, who cares? It's men of color, right? Oh, sorry, gay men of color. So, not top of the list for the police force. Also, let's talk about the similarities for a second. If you heard the podcast with Dennis Nilsson, you can see the similarities between Nilsson and Port because they both liked young, boyish, androgynous kind of guys, and then they like to overpower them. They like to have unconscious sex with them. Okay. They like to rape them and take power over them and rape them. So there's this sort of similarity between Dennis Nilsson and Stephen Port. So to dive into a mind like that, you have to wonder like why. So it's power. Obviously, it's power. If you're raping somebody who's unconscious, why is it better that they're unconscious? I wonder though. I get the power thing. Okay, you feel powerless in your life. You're getting power. You're taking somebody else's power. It makes you feel good. Fine. But the unconscious thing is more like, isn't that less power? Because they can't fight back. Are you afraid that they're going to fight back? Are you afraid that they're going to fight back and you're not going to win? It just seems like an extra step of like lechery. That's just an extra disgusting step. Also, drugging somebody who doesn't do drugs or is unwilling / unknowing that there is drug taking is complete. That is one of my, listen, I've done my share of partying. And the number, I mean, that's like a golden rule of partying, with your friends and going out and everything. Nobody, I mean, you do not cross that line. You never, ever give somebody something without their knowledge. That is so wrong. That is, for me, that's the same as rape. You're basically raping them because you're taking away their ability to consent, and you're administering something without them knowing, without their consent, and then they're just gonna have to deal with the consequences of that. Like it takes all the power, again, power. It takes all and the choice away from the person. And it's just one of the worst things I can actually think of. And I don't know where that stems from. It never happened to me or anybody that I know personally. But it's honestly one of the worst things for me that you could do to a person is to drug them without their knowledge, or consent. It's just disgusting. So he's an asshole, he's in jail, and the streets and Grindr are a safer place. Having said that, play safe, guys. Be careful out there. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you in the next episode of True Gay Crime. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to find the True Gay Crime Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at True Gay Crime. And we'd love to hear from you. Do you have an LGBTQ crime story from your city? You can send your story to truegaycrime@gmail.com, and I'll share it on a future episode of the show. Did you know you can subscribe, rate, and review True Gay Crime on Apple Podcasts? It would mean everything to me if you did, because it helps me create content you like, and it lets Apple know to share it with more people. Thank you for listening. And remember, always look behind you, lock your doors, tell someone where you're going, and look out for each other.
Why can't we all just get along?